Ancient Rome was a world without mercy, built on military strength, strict discipline, and an unforgiving legal system. Mercy was rarely an option. Whether you were a deserter, a criminal, or simply on the wrong side of power, justice was swift and brutal. The Romans didn't just kill their enemies, they made a spectacle out of it. Public executions were held in arenas, military camps, or city squares, drawing massive crowds. Some were meant purely as entertainment, while others were carefully crafted to fit the crime. And for those who committed the most unthinkable act, killing their own parents, the Romans reserved a fate so bizarre and horrifying that even seasoned executioners might hesitate. This was the punishment of the sack, or poenaculi. But this was just one of many ways Rome maintained order through terror. Across the empire, punishments ranged from crucifixion and burning alive to starvation and dismemberment. Rome didn't simply execute criminals, it turned their deaths into a lesson for all. These gruesome spectacles served to deter crime, reinforce authority, and entertain the masses, solidifying Rome's grip on its vast empire. To understand the sheer brutality of Roman justice, we must delve into the terrifying details of their most infamous executions. The punishment of the sack, a fate worse than death. In Roman society, respect for one's parents was sacred. Killing a mother or father wasn't just a crime, it was an insult to the gods and an attack on the natural order. The punishment wasn't just death, it was ritual humiliation, terror, and agony all at once. Once found guilty, the condemned were sewn into a large leather sack. But they weren't alone. Inside with them were 4 living creatures, a snake, a monkey, a dog, and a rooster. The sack was tied shut, sealing the person in complete darkness, trapped with these frantic, clawing, biting creatures. If the shock and suffocation didn't kill them, the terrified animals inside might. Then came the final horror. The sack, weighted down with stones, was thrown into a river. It quickly sank, dragging the condemned and the animals into the depths. There, in total darkness, as the sack filled with water, the person drowned in terror, struggling against the very creatures they had been sewn in with. This execution wasn't about spectacle. It was about erasing the criminal from existence, washing them away like they had never lived. Even in later years, when modifications were made to Roman law, poenaculi remained a terrifying punishment reserved for the most detested criminals. The ritual nature of the execution, the symbolic rejection of the condemned from society, and the deliberate suffering involved make it one of the most disturbing aspects of Roman justice. Military discipline, the terror of fustuarium and decimation. In the Roman military, discipline was everything. A single act of cowardice or desertion could put an entire legion at risk. Rome had no tolerance for weakness. The punishment was fustuarium, a brutal execution where the condemned was beaten to death by their own comrades. This was not just an execution, it was a public lesson. A convicted soldier was stripped of his weapons and armor, reduced from a warrior to a condemned man. His fellow soldiers, his brothers in arms, were ordered to form a circle. One by one, they took turns clubbing him to death with wooden staffs. The first strike might break a rib, the second could crush a limb. There was no mercy, no way out, just blow after blow until the condemned lay lifeless on the ground. The most terrifying part? Refusing to participate wasn't an option. Any soldier who hesitated to strike risked being punished himself. If an entire unit was guilty of cowardice, the Romans took things even further. They used a punishment called decimation. Every 10th soldier was randomly selected and executed by his own comrades. The rest were forced to watch and continue fighting, knowing they could be next if they ever disobeyed an order again. Fear was the glue that held the Roman legions together. But discipline extended beyond the battlefield. Soldiers caught stealing, disobeying direct orders, or showing insubordination could face branding, mutilation, or exile. For the Romans, maintaining a strong army wasn't just about training, it was about ensuring absolute obedience through the ever-present threat of pain and death. The psychological impact of these punishments was profound, instilling unwavering loyalty and unshakable fear among the ranks. Death by wild beasts, damnatio ad bestias. If death by clubbing was brutal, damnatio ad bestias was pure horror. This punishment didn't just kill, it turned execution into a spectacle, a form of blood-soaked entertainment that thrilled the masses. Inside the Colosseum and other grand arenas, thousands of spectators gathered to watch criminals, traitors, and prisoners face their doom in the most savage way possible, being torn apart by wild animals. Those sentenced to damnatio ad bestias were led into the arena with no weapons, no armor, just their bare hands. Some were chained to posts, unable to move. Others were forced to run for their lives, knowing there was no escape. Then the cages opened. Lions, tigers, bears, and even packs of starving wolves were released, their hunger driving them into a frenzy. The condemned had seconds, maybe minutes, before they were mauled, their screams mixed with the deafening cheers of the crowd. But this wasn't always a quick death. The Romans, ever the masters of cruelty, sometimes weakened the animals beforehand, ensuring the execution dragged on longer. A single lion might toy with its victim, biting and clawing, but not delivering a killing blow. A pack of wolves could take turns attacking, making the suffering last. The ultimate cruelty, Rome's most unimaginable punishments. Rome had countless ways to make criminals suffer. Crucifixion was perhaps the most infamous, a slow, agonizing death designed to inflict maximum pain and humiliation. Another method was death by molten gold, where the condemned had molten metal poured down their throat, a fate as horrifying as it was symbolic. Fire, starvation, and impalement were all used to instill fear. Rome's punishments weren't just about justice, they were about control. They were about fear. They were about reminding every citizen and every enemy that to defy the empire was to invite suffering beyond imagination. A legacy of fear and power. The Roman Empire's brutal execution methods were more than punishments. They were instruments of control. From the ritualistic horror of poena culi to the public terror of damnatio ad bestias, these methods ensured obedience, instilled fear, and entertained the masses. By making suffering a spectacle, Rome reinforced its authority, sending a clear message that defying the empire meant a fate worse than death. Though centuries have passed, the legacy of Roman torture endures in history books and popular imagination. These punishments reveal the extreme lengths Rome went to maintain its rule, proving that even the greatest empires relied on cruelty to sustain their power. A world beyond Rome's brutality. Unlike ancient Rome, where justice was often cruel and unforgiving, modern societies have built legal systems based on fairness, rehabilitation, and human rights. Where Rome ruled by fear, today's world strives, however imperfectly, for due process and dignity. Public executions, brutal punishments, and spectacles of suffering are relics of the past, replaced by courts, appeals, and the belief that even those who err deserve a chance at redemption. While history remembers Rome for its grandeur and military might, it also serves as a reminder of how far humanity has come. Instead of arenas filled with spectators cheering for death, we have stadiums filled with crowds celebrating life, music, sports, and unity. Instead of executions meant to instill fear, we have laws designed to protect. Though the past was often dark, the progress we've made proves that civilization isn't just about power, it's about compassion, justice, and the value of every human life. Imagine yourself standing in the midst of battle during the twilight years of the Roman Empire. The clash of shields echoes through the air, the gleam of armor reflects the fury of combat, while war cries rise above the chaos, sending shivers through friend and foe alike. But suddenly, before the enemy even reaches the Roman lines, something unexpected happens. A silent storm descends from the sky. Small projectiles whistle through the air, cutting down warriors in an instant. They are not arrows, they are not spears, they are something far more terrifying, the plumbata. With a simple flick of the arm, Roman legionaries unleash a storm of deadly darts. The battlefield transforms. Soldiers collapse before they even engage in combat. Panic spreads as shields crack, armor buckles, and warriors fall, struck down by a weapon they never even saw coming. Few realize that this seemingly simple innovation, this silent but lethal projectile, was the secret to Rome's military resilience in its final centuries. But what made the plumbata so deadly? Why was it feared across the empire, and how did it reshape the way Rome fought its wars? Prepare to uncover the mystery behind one of the most devastating weapons ever wielded by the Roman legions. For centuries, the Roman legions were the foundation of the greatest empire the world had ever seen. From the misty forests of Germania to the golden sands of Egypt, Roman soldiers marched in perfect unison, shields locked together, their gladiae ready to cut down any who opposed them. Heavy infantry was Rome's greatest strength. The very sight of a Roman legion advancing in formation was enough to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. Their strategy was simple but effective: march forward in a wall of iron, force the enemy into a chaotic retreat, and strike them down with cold precision. But as the centuries passed, the battlefield began to change. Rome's enemies adapted. They no longer met the legions head-on. Instead, new hit-and-run tactics emerged. Mounted warriors struck swiftly, disappearing before the Roman infantry could respond. Archers and skirmishers attacked from a distance, refusing to engage in traditional hand-to-hand combat. The rigid formations of the legions, once their greatest strength, became a weakness. Rome needed a solution. The empire's entire military structure was reorganized. Fewer heavy infantry, more cavalry, smaller, more mobile units. Speed and flexibility became the priority. But this new army faced a major problem. How could they maintain their ability to fight at range without sacrificing their mobility? The answer came in the form of a simple but ingenious invention, a weapon so small it could be carried unnoticed, yet so deadly it could alter the course of a battle. At first glance, the plumbata looked like nothing more than an oversized dart. It had a lightweight wooden shaft measuring between 30 and 50 centimeters, with a razor-sharp metal tip designed to pierce armor with ease. The plumbata. But the true genius of the plumbata lay in a small yet crucial detail, a lead weight positioned near the upper part of the shaft. This seemingly minor feature transformed the dart into a deadly projectile. The added weight gave the plumbata stability in flight, allowing it to spin as it soared through the air. This rotation increased its accuracy and impact force, ensuring that when it struck its target, it did so with terrifying precision. The lead weight also amplified the force of impact, allowing the plumbata to punch through shields and armor with devastating effect. A well-placed hit to the chest or neck could be instantly fatal. A strike to an arm or leg would leave a warrior crippled and bleeding, unable to continue fighting. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the plumbata was its reusability. Unlike the Roman pilum, which was designed to bend upon impact to prevent reuse, the plumbata could be retrieved and thrown again, allowing soldiers to maintain a nearly endless supply of deadly projectiles throughout the battle. Yet having a lethal weapon is one thing, using it effectively in battle is another. So how did Roman soldiers deploy this silent killer? Roman legionaries did not carry plumbata loosely in their hands. Instead, they were strategically stored. Each soldier carried at least 5, carefully attached to the inside of their shields using leather holsters. This placement allowed for quick and seamless access. Even in the heat of battle, a soldier could reach down, grab a dart, and throw it, all without breaking formation or exposing himself to the enemy. But the way the plumbata was thrown was unlike any other Roman weapon. Instead of being hurled straight ahead like a spear, the plumbata was launched in an upward arc, using a vertical overhand movement. This technique maximized the range and impact of the weapon, sending the dart high into the air before it spun downward at deadly speeds, striking enemies with the full force of its lead-weighted momentum. And when hundreds of plumbata were launched simultaneously, the effect was nothing short of terrifying. The first sign of an attack didn't come from the ground, it came from above. A cloud of spinning darts descended upon the battlefield, tearing through armor, embedding into shields, and striking down warriors before they could even raise their weapons. The enemy's carefully organized formation dissolved into chaos. Warriors panicked, desperately trying to shield themselves from the onslaught. Some fled, others fell where they stood, and before the battle had truly begun, the Romans had already seized control of the fight. The plumbata was not just a battlefield weapon, it was a symbol of Rome's ingenuity. It was so effective that it was recorded in one of the most important military documents of the time, the De Rebus Bellicis, a 4th century military treatise detailing Rome's latest war strategies. This document confirms that the plumbata was standardized and officially adopted into the Roman military. Legionaries were trained to throw them with pinpoint accuracy, and their shields were designed to carry them for easy access. Even after the fall of Rome, its weapons, tactics, and strategies continued to shape warfare for centuries to come. For centuries, the plumbata played a crucial role in Rome's last stand against the barbarian invasions. But even the most innovative weapons could not stop the inevitable. As Rome weakened, so too did its mighty legions. The empire fractured, its armies dissolved, and with them, the plumbata disappeared into history. But its legacy remains, a testament to Rome's ability to innovate, adapt, and dominate. Rome may have pioneered the plumbata, but its devastating impact did not go unnoticed by other kingdoms and military forces. As Rome's influence declined, its enemies and former allies alike adopted and adapted this lethal weapon for their own use. One of the first groups to incorporate the plumbata into their arsenal were the Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire, which outlived the Western Empire by nearly 1,000 years. Even as the old Roman legions faded into history, Byzantine armies continued using the plumbata, refining its design and keeping it as a crucial part of their military tactics. Byzantine soldiers, known as the scutatoi, carried plumbata darts in much the same way as their Roman predecessors, attached to their shields, ready to unleash a deadly barrage at a moment's notice. Historical records suggest that the Byzantine military employed plumbata in siege warfare, both as a defensive and offensive weapon. From the towering walls of Constantinople, defenders would rain down plumbata upon enemy troops attempting to storm the city. Unlike arrows, which required bows and significant training, the plumbata could be used by virtually any soldier with minimal effort, making it a reliable weapon for urban defense. Beyond the Byzantines, the Goths and Vandals, who once fought against Rome, also saw the tactical advantage of the plumbata. During the 5th and 6th centuries, as these warrior tribes raided former Roman territories, they adopted Roman military techniques, including the use of this deadly dart. Some historians suggest that remnants of Roman-trained auxiliary forces continued using plumbata under their new rulers, blending it with their own guerrilla-style warfare. Even later in history, some medieval armies used similar weighted darts in battle. While not exactly the same as the Roman plumbata, the concept of a lead-weighted throwing dart persisted in certain European and Middle Eastern military traditions. Some historians speculate that the idea may have indirectly influenced later javelins, throwing axes, and even early hand-thrown explosives. Though the plumbata eventually faded from widespread use, its legacy lived on in the evolution of ranged projectile warfare. The concept of infantry carrying lightweight, reusable, long-range weapons would later influence the development of crossbows, hand cannons, and eventually firearms. The plumbata was more than just a weapon, it was a testament to innovation in warfare, proving that sometimes the simplest ideas could change the course of battle. Now imagine yourself as a Roman legionary. Would you wield your gladius, engaging in brutal close combat? Or would you trust the plumbata, striking your foes before they could even reach you?
In the golden light of a Roman morning, the distant roar of a crowd might be mistaken for thunder. But it wasn't the skies that stirred. It was the people, tens of thousands strong, gathered in the Colosseum for a show unlike any other. Gladiators, warriors, icons of blood and bravery, their names whispered in markets and shouted in taverns, their stories etched into stone and memory. But the story of the arena didn't begin with cheering masses or emperors waving silk. It started somewhere quieter, somewhere sacred, at a funeral. In the earliest days of Rome, long before the Colosseum stood tall, gladiator combat was not a form of public entertainment. It was a sacred ritual. At the funerals of Rome's wealthiest elites, enslaved fighters were made to duel one another to the death, not out of cruelty or spectacle, but as an offering. It was believed that by shedding blood, the spirit of the deceased would be purified and prepared for its journey into the afterlife. Death served death, and the fallen provided a kind of sacrificial passport to eternity. This tradition didn't spring from Roman soil alone. It was borrowed, as so many Roman things were, from an older people, the Etruscans. Their mysterious culture and elaborate funeral rites laid the foundation for what would become a Roman obsession. But where the Etruscans had seen sacred ritual, the Romans saw something else waiting to be born: a stage, a crowd, a spectacle. As the Republic grew and transformed into an empire, so too did this once private rite. Gladiatorial combat moved from family tombs to public forums. No longer limited to funerals, it became a tool of the state, a way to pacify the masses and flex political muscle. Senators and would-be emperors began sponsoring games as acts of generosity, hoping to curry favor with the people. Admission was free, bread was provided, the blood flowed, and the crowds came back for more. This marked the beginning of the arena not as a place of mourning, but of entertainment. A place where men fought for glory, freedom, or survival, where lives were spent like coin. And yet, beneath the violence, there remained a thread of the sacred. A belief that combat revealed the truth of a man's soul, that in the clash of steel and the heat of battle, something divine could be glimpsed, if only for a moment. But as the years passed, even that sacred thread began to fray. The Romans, ever hungry for novelty, began to demand more. More blood, more chaos, more showmanship. The arena would soon be home not just to duels, but to blindfolded fighters, chariot battles, and deadly encounters with beasts of every shape and size. This was just the beginning, because in Rome, even death had an audience, and the curtain was only starting to rise. By the time gladiator combat had evolved into a public event, the Romans had already grown accustomed to the sight of men locked in mortal combat. For a culture steeped in war, conquest, and honor, the bloodshed of the arena quickly became familiar. And as with anything familiar, the crowds began to crave something more. Ordinary duels weren't enough. The people wanted surprise, danger, novelty, and the promoters, always eager to outdo each other, were happy to oblige. The games began to adopt gimmicks, each one more outrageous than the last. One of the strangest was the plumbata match. In these bizarre duels, gladiators were forced to fight blindfolded, or more precisely, with helmets sealed shut. No eye holes, no visibility, no idea where their opponent was. These unfortunate men stumbled across the sands, swinging blindly, hoping their next step didn't lead to a blade. To make matters worse, these fighters weren't allowed to wear armor. Stripped down to nothing but loincloths and sandals, they were easy targets, exposed to every cut and strike. The result was a clumsy, chaotic, and often brutally short display that thrilled the bloodthirsty crowd. But the dangers of the arena didn't end with blindfolds. Rome was an empire of beasts, real ones, imported from every corner of its vast dominion. Lions from Africa, elephants from the east, crocodiles from the Nile. These creatures were paraded into the Colosseum, not as curiosities, but as instruments of death. The opening act of many gladiator games featured wild animal hunts, known as venaciones. Here, skilled fighters called venatores took the stage. These men were trained hunters, equipped with spears, javelins, and bows. They would stalk the arena with quiet confidence, taking down dangerous creatures with precise strikes. Their work was part artistry, part execution, but not every man in the beast fights had the benefit of training. There were also the bestiarii, condemned criminals and prisoners of war, sentenced to die in the most brutal fashion Rome could imagine. Unlike the venatores, bestiarii were given little or no weaponry. They weren't meant to win. They were there to die, ripped apart by teeth and claws while the crowd roared with delight. In Rome, even execution was theatrical. And if you think that was shocking, wait until you hear what happened when women entered the arena. In the shadow of Rome's towering amphitheaters, where the sand soaked red with blood and the cries of the crowd echoed like thunder, not every warrior who stepped into the arena was a man. Though rare and often overlooked, there were women who fought as gladiators. Known as gladiatresses, these female combatants stood under the same unforgiving sun, in front of the same roaring crowds, and faced the same brutal tests of skill and strength as their male counterparts. We don't know exactly when women first entered the arena. Roman historians were often reluctant to record the details, especially when it came to anything that challenged their rigid ideas of gender and honor. But we do know this. By the 1st century AD, female gladiators had become more than a rumor. They were real. They were respected by some, ridiculed by others, but always unforgettable. Many gladiatrices fought in theatrical or novelty battles. Emperors like Domitian, ever eager to stir excitement and humor, sometimes pitted women against dwarves or arranged parody matches that blurred the line between entertainment and insult. These performances weren't always about valor. They were about spectacle, about getting a laugh or a gasp. But not all female gladiators were treated as a joke. Some were serious fighters, skilled, disciplined, fearless. We even have ancient artwork that confirms their presence. In the city of Halicarnassus, a relief carving immortalizes a duel between two women named Amazon and Achillea. According to the inscription, the match ended in a draw. So impressive were their skills, both were granted release, a rare honor in the gladiator world. Despite this, gladiatresses were never widely accepted by Roman society. Many saw them as vulgar, unnatural, entertainers crossing a line they were never meant to approach. Still, their presence in the arena continued for decades, fueled by the hunger of the crowd and the ambitions of those who sponsored them. But like all things Rome found fashionable, it didn't last. In the year 200 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus issued a ban. No more female gladiators. Perhaps he was responding to moral pressure. Perhaps it was an effort to restore Roman dignity. Or maybe, just maybe, he was worried that these women, fighting for glory under the same rules as men, were proving a little too powerful for comfort. Whatever the reason, the age of the gladiatress came to an end. But their legacy still lingers, half buried beneath centuries of dust and denial. We've been trained by pop culture to imagine every gladiator match as a duel to the death. Steel clashing, sand flying, one man standing victorious while the other lies broken beneath him. But the truth? It's far more complicated. You see, gladiators weren't disposable. They were expensive. Training a single fighter took months, sometimes years, and required expert instructors, rigorous diets, and constant conditioning. A well-trained gladiator was a serious investment. Feeding them, housing them, healing their injuries, this all cost money. So while the games may have looked like senseless slaughter to outsiders, they were actually managed with a surprising level of practicality. For most gladiators, death wasn't the goal. Survival was. Not just because they valued their lives, but because their owners, Laniste, wanted a return on their investment. This meant that even in defeat, a gladiator could walk away if he had fought well enough to entertain the crowd. And that's where things get fascinating. If a bout became stale, if both men grew tired, circling each other, trading half-hearted blows, it could be declared a draw. The match would end, the crowd would grumble, and new fighters would take the stage. But if the duel was spectacular, if both combatants gave the crowd a battle worthy of legend, they might both be spared, celebrated, and sent back to recover in honor. It wasn't just about winning. It was about putting on a show. This system meant that gladiators, like today's athletes, could build fan bases. A popular fighter, brave, skilled, dramatic, might be spared again and again simply because the crowd loved him. It was a brutal profession, yes, but it was also a performance. A strange blend of combat and theater, life and death, sweat and spectacle. And for the men who stepped into that ring, survival was often a matter of skill, showmanship, and the whims of the crowd. By now, we know the life of a Roman gladiator wasn't just about combat. It was an entire ecosystem, a world of politics, performance, training, and survival. But there's still more to explore in the twilight of the games. Let's start with something unexpected: vehicular combat. No, not chariot racing. That was its own massive event, complete with teams, factions, and betting scandals. What we're talking about here is gladiators in chariots. The Esidarii, as they were called, fought while riding in fast-moving platforms, sometimes reenacting great battles from Roman history. One common scenario: the rebellion of Boudica, the fierce British queen who led a revolt against Roman occupation. In the arena, her legendary last stand was turned into entertainment, with costumed fighters dashing across the sand in a whirling blur of wheels and weapons. It wasn't an everyday event. These large-scale mock battles were reserved for special games, usually when an emperor wanted to show off, or when the city was celebrating a great victory. After all, coordinating multiple chariots and dozens of gladiators wasn't cheap. For the most part, the arena was a place for one-on-one duels. That was the bread and circuses formula that worked. One man against another, with fate hanging in the balance. And yet, not all battles were fought by trained professionals. Sometimes the arena was a death sentence, a punishment. Criminals and prisoners, those who committed especially heinous crimes, were tossed into the ring without weapons, without training, without hope. These poor souls were known as bestiarii, and they often faced wild animals instead of human opponents. Crocodiles, lions, bears. The animals weren't always pitted against other beasts. Sometimes they were made to face the condemned. No armor, no escape, just the slow, brutal countdown of the crowd's cheers. And what if someone refused to fight? What if a man simply said no? The answer was simple. He would be beaten, tortured, sometimes even branded with hot iron rods to force him into the arena. The only way out was death. Or, in very rare cases, a successful plea to the emperor. But mercy in Rome wasn't guaranteed. Yet despite all of this, despite the cruelty, the danger, the bloodshed, gladiators were admired. They were the rock stars of their time. Crowds chanted their names. Children collected figurines of them. Women fell in love with them. And emperors envied their popularity. Even Commodus, the infamous emperor, couldn't resist. He entered the arena himself, believing he was a warrior descended from the gods. Of course, he fought rigged matches, victories carefully staged to preserve his ego. But the crowd still came, still cheered, and still watched. Every single time. Gladiators carried the weight of legend. Their weapons were an extension of their identity. Curved blades for Thracians, tridents and nets for Retiari, heavy shields for Myrmidons. Every fighter was a character, a symbol, a walking story of survival. And when their time finally came, when they could no longer fight or were granted their freedom, they became legends, statues, myths, echoes in the sand. So the next time you think of a gladiator, don't just imagine blood and steel. Imagine a life spent under the gaze of thousands. Imagine the pressure to perform, the fear, the pride, the triumph, and above all, imagine the silence after the final cheer fades. That's where the story ends.
Ah, the sea. She carries our legions, our grain, our goods from the far edges of the empire. But she also humbles even the proudest of men. For all the might of Rome, its legions, its laws, its luxuries, when a man takes to the sea, he is at nature's mercy. And nowhere is that more obvious than when he must answer the call of nature itself. You may think that the worst trials of a sea voyage are storms or pirates, but no, let me tell you, it is the moment when one must relieve oneself aboard a Roman ship that the true test of dignity begins. There are no grand latrines on these vessels, no marble benches like those in the baths of Carthage or Ostia, no mosaics to gaze upon while one contemplates the day, no perfumed slaves to bring cloth or scented oils. Here, on the creaking decks of a merchant galley or warship, we squat like common dogs, over a simple board with a hole built out over the prow of the ship. It is called the forica, and while it serves its purpose, it is no place for modesty. Perched above the sea with your tunic hiked up, exposed to the wind and the stares of your fellow sailors, one quickly learns humility. There is no privacy here, only the sky above, the water below, and the constant threat that one good wave might carry you off into Neptune's embrace. And yet it is here, balanced between sky and sea, trousers up around your knees, that you come to understand the fragility of the body and the folly of pride. Even a Roman senator, if he found himself aboard, would have no better place to sit. This, dear listener, is but the beginning. In the watches to come, I shall tell you more of how the crew coped, what they used to wipe, and what happened when storms forced us below deck with no fresh air and nowhere to go. Now imagine this. The seas turn rough. Jupiter growls in the clouds, and Neptune stirs the waters. The bow of the ship plunges into wave after wave, and no man dares use the forica at the prow. To squat there in such weather would be to court death, and so we are driven below deck. Below, the air is heavy, thick with the breath of 100 men and the stench of unwashed bodies. The oarsmen, if it is a galley, already labor in the heat, and now, when nature calls, there is nowhere to go. Some men, those with discipline, resort to chamber pots, clay vessels passed between hammocks in whispered shame. But most do what they must. They squat near the stairwells, piss in corners, or lean over the bilge grates where water collects in the ship's belly. The result, I need not tell you, is appalling. Waste seeps down through the wooden planks, carried by the motion of the waves. It puddles, it festers. The bilge, the lowest part of the hull, becomes a pit of filth foul enough to make even the hardened legionaries gag. We tried to keep it clean. Slaves or unfortunate sailors would operate the pumps, drawing out that cursed water. But the smell, by the gods, the smell, it clings to you. It sinks into the wood. No incense can mask it. No vinegar wash will chase it away. And yet we endure. A voyage from Ostia to Alexandria may last weeks, and each day below deck becomes a battle of its own. Not of sword and shield, but of nose and stomach. One learns to eat quickly and breathe through the mouth. But the worst part? Disease. These cramped, unsanitary quarters breed illness faster than any battlefield. One careless act, one chamber pot left unemptied, and dysentery can spread like wildfire through the hold. Still we press on, because Rome's empire runs on salt and grain and iron, and the sea is the road we must travel. Of course, not all aboard a Roman vessel faced the same humiliations. As in all things under the sun, the dignity of defecation was divided by rank. If you were an officer, a wealthy merchant, or a favored guest of the ship's captain, your needs were better accommodated. Toward the stern, in the shadow of the quarterdeck, there were often small enclosures, wooden boxes tucked discreetly at the ship's side. We called them latrinae privatae. These spaces were not luxurious by the standards of a Roman villa, no mosaics of dolphins, no marble benches carved with Bacchic scenes, but they offered the one thing every sailor craved: privacy. Within these little closets, a man might sit in peace, shielded from wind and eyes. The seat was still aboard with a hole, the waste still dropped directly into the sea, but at least the user didn't have to cling to a beam and pray to Fortuna he wouldn't be swept away mid-act. Some ships even carried chamber pots of bronze or fired clay for the officers, cleaned regularly by slaves, and they were allowed to bathe from a bucket afterward with sponges soaked in vinegar, just as we do at home. I once served under a tribune who insisted his latrine be lined with cedar and perfumed with frankincense. We called it the privatum thronum, the private throne. He used to joke that Caesar himself had nothing better. We laughed, of course, but secretly we envied him. The hierarchy of Rome extended even to our waist. While the lowly sailor clung to a rain-slick rope, trousers around his knees and backside bared to the wind, the officer sat in quiet contemplation, his modesty intact. Still, even the finest latrine aboard a Roman ship could not keep out the stench that lingered after weeks at sea. Even the highborn had to wash their hands with seawater and dry them on their cloaks. And when the storms came, all distinctions disappeared. Nature, as ever, is a great equalizer. In better weather we could clean, pour buckets of seawater, burn incense, scrub the decks with vinegar-soaked cloth. But in the midst of a tempest, no man cared for cleanliness, only for staying upright. Now the sea begins to calm again, a softer breeze returning. It is a strange thing, isn't it? To conquer Gaul, to build aqueducts, to rule the known world, and yet be utterly defeated by one man's need to defecate in a storm. This too is Rome. When the storm passed, when the sea smoothed out like a senator's toga, we emerged from below like shades rising from the underworld. The deck was soaked, the sails limp, the men bleary-eyed and sore, and the stench, by the gods, the stench, hung in the air like an unwelcome guest who refused to leave. So we began the rituals of recovery. Buckets of seawater were hauled up and splashed over the planks. Slaves scrubbed with bristle brushes and vinegar-soaked cloths. Incense was burned, frankincense if you were lucky, or pitch and myrtle if not. Anything to drive out the scent of fear, filth, and humanity. Some captains kept lavender tucked into their personal quarters or oranges in sealed crates to sniff when the air grew foul. But out on the deck, where most of us lived, the only perfume was salt and sweat and the faint hope of a port not too far off. Sometimes there was humor in it all, a soldier slipping on a slick deck, covered in what we hoped was mud. A cabin boy caught relieving himself too close to the grain, chased by the cook with a ladle. Or the swabber, always the swabber, grumbling that he had once dreamed of glory and now spent his days mopping up human waste between barrels of olive oil. And through it all, we carried on, because that's what Romans do. We endure storms, hunger, homesickness, and yes, even latrine duty with the same iron will we bring to building roads and laying siege. The sea is cruel, the voyage is long, but we do not turn back. One day we arrive, the smell of land, of cypress trees and fresh bread, the promise of a bathhouse, a good wine, a clean tunic, and perhaps, just perhaps, a latrine that doesn't threaten your life. Until then, we do what must be done. We squat, we wipe, we laugh, and we pray to Fortuna for fair winds and dry feet. Thus ends our voyage through the most humble corners of Roman seafaring life. May your next journey be clean and well ventilated.
Imagine standing in the heart of ancient Rome surrounded by towering marble statues of mighty gods. Jupiter, Neptune, Mars, names that echo through history. But here's the secret. These gods, the powerful deities worshipped by the Romans, were not entirely their own. They were borrowed, reshaped, and in some cases, almost exact copies of the gods of ancient Greece. But why did Rome, a civilization so powerful, feel the need to adopt another culture's gods? And how did these deities change as they crossed from Greece to Rome? Tonight, we unravel the truth behind the Roman gods, how they were inspired, altered, and even made stronger by the empire that worshipped them. Let's begin.
The gods of Rome were once faceless, formless, and vast, spirits of nature, guardians of hearth and field, invisible forces shaping the lives of the early Romans. But as Rome expanded and its people came into contact with the grandeur of Greek civilization in the 6th century BC, something changed. They began to see their gods in human form. This transformation wasn't just about aesthetics, it reshaped Roman religion itself. The Romans, practical and disciplined, saw the beauty and mythology of Greece and adopted it as their own. They took the Greek gods, changed their names, and wove them into the fabric of Roman culture. But in doing so, they left their own mark on these deities, molding them to fit Rome's ideals of duty, power, and order.
In this series, we'll uncover the striking similarities and subtle differences between Greek and Roman gods, how some changed completely while others remained nearly the same. Let's begin with one of the most fascinating comparisons: Juno and Hera.
To rule over the heavens and the gods themselves, there must be a queen, a goddess of power, of protection, of divine authority. For the Greeks, that queen was Hera. For the Romans, she was Juno. At first glance, the two seem identical. Both are the wives of the king of the gods, Zeus and Jupiter. Both reign as the protectors of marriage and the family. Both are powerful and commanding. But beneath the surface is where the differences emerge. Hera in Greek mythology is often depicted as vengeful, fierce, and unrelenting. She is a goddess who punishes betrayal, who pursues Zeus's many lovers with merciless wrath. Even mortal women and their children suffer under her fury. To the Greeks, Hera embodied the raw emotional power of a scorned queen. Juno, however, is different. The Romans viewed her as a figure of grace, of dignity, of statehood itself. While she too was a guardian of marriage, she was also deeply tied to the well-being of Rome. She was not just a wife, she was a counselor, a protector, and a patroness of the Roman people. Where Hera was feared, Juno was revered. Perhaps this is a reflection of the cultures themselves. The Greeks saw their gods as deeply human, with flaws and tempers that mirrored their own. The Romans, on the other hand, valued duty, structure, and the strength of the state above all else, and their gods followed suit. And so Juno was not merely Hera under a different name. She was a goddess transformed, reshaped to fit the ideals of Rome. But if Juno was Rome's queen of the heavens, then who ruled the seas? That title belonged to Neptune, the Roman counterpart of Poseidon. And as we will see next, his story is not quite the same as his Greek predecessors. The sea has always been a force of mystery and power, unpredictable and untamed. The Greeks and Romans both understood this, and they gave this domain to a mighty god. For the Greeks, he was Poseidon. For the Romans, he was Neptune. At first glance, they seem like the same deity. Both ruled over the oceans, both wielded a powerful trident, and both commanded the storms and waves. But their origins tell a different story. Poseidon was more than just the god of the sea. To the Greeks, he was also the god of earthquakes, horses, and raw, untamed force. He was unpredictable, quick to anger, and capable of shaking the earth itself when enraged. He was feared as much as he was worshipped. Neptune, however, had a different beginning. Originally, he was not a sea god at all. In early Roman religion, he was a god of fresh water, lakes, rivers, and springs. It wasn't until around 399 BC that the Romans fully associated him with Poseidon and the sea. Even then, Neptune lacked the violent, unpredictable nature of his Greek counterpart. He was a powerful god, but he was more of a ruler than a wild force of nature. This shift reflects Rome's perspective on power. While the Greeks saw their gods as passionate and volatile, the Romans valued structure and dominion. Their Neptune was a lord of the waters, not a raging storm. But if Neptune ruled the sea, then who ruled over love and beauty among the Greeks? It was the radiant Aphrodite. For the Romans, it was Venus. And just like Neptune, Venus took on a role unique to Rome. Love, beauty, and desire have always been among the most powerful forces in human history. To the Greeks, these were embodied in Aphrodite, the goddess of love and passion. To the Romans, she became Venus. At first glance, the two seem identical, each a vision of beauty, each possessing an irresistible charm that could sway gods and mortals alike. Aphrodite was primarily the goddess of love, beauty, and attraction. Her myths often revolved around romance, seduction, and divine drama. She was born from the sea foam, and her very presence could incite love and longing. Her power was undeniable, but it was focused almost entirely on matters of the heart. Venus, however, took on a broader role in Roman society. She was not just the goddess of love, she was the goddess of fertility, prosperity, and even victory. The Romans saw her as a divine ancestor, with Julius Caesar himself claiming descent from her through Aeneas, the legendary Trojan hero. She was worshipped not just in matters of love, but also as a protector of the Roman people, ensuring their success and expansion. This difference reveals much about the Greeks and Romans. The Greeks saw love as something personal, something intimate. The Romans, ever practical and ambitious, saw love as a force that could shape empires. To them, Venus was more than beauty. She was power. However, power comes in many forms for the Romans. One known form is something we know and understand even to this day, something all humans have heard or seen in their life. War, it is destruction, it is chaos. But for the Romans, it was also power, conquest, and the foundation of their empire. And at the heart of war stood a god. To the Greeks, he was Ares, a figure of violence and bloodshed. To the Romans, he was Mars, the god who shaped the destiny of Rome itself. At first glance, they seem alike. Both wield weapons, both are sons of Jupiter or Zeus, and both revel in battle. But where Ares was feared, Mars was honored. In Greek mythology, Ares was not a noble god. He was unpredictable, driven by rage, and often humiliated in myths. Even among the gods, he was an outcast, representing the reckless destruction of war rather than its discipline. The Greeks respected Athena, the goddess of strategic warfare, far more than Ares, whose presence often meant nothing but ruin. Mars, however, was different. He was not just the god of war, he was the god of Rome's might. The Romans saw war as necessary, as a means to expand and secure their empire. Mars was a protector, a father to Rome itself, as the legendary Romulus and Remus, founders of the city, were said to be his sons. Unlike Ares, Mars was not just destruction, he was victory, order, and the very spirit of Roman ambition. And so, while Ares was a god of war, Mars was a god of conquest, a reflection of Rome itself, not just fighting battles, but winning them. But even in war, the gods needed a leader, a ruler to command both the heavens and the earth. And that brings us to Jupiter, the greatest of them all. At the very top of Mount Olympus and the Roman pantheon stood a single, all-powerful figure, the king of the gods, the god of the sky, thunder, and order. For the Greeks, he was Zeus. For the Romans, he was Jupiter. Unlike many other Roman gods, Jupiter was almost a direct copy of Zeus. Their attributes, their myths, and their dominion over the heavens were nearly identical. Both wielded the thunderbolt. Both ruled with absolute authority. Both were known for their wisdom, but also for their many affairs. But while Zeus was often portrayed as a god with human flaws, prone to anger, deception, and impulsive decisions, Jupiter was something more. The Romans saw their chief deity as the embodiment of law, order, and the stability of Rome itself. He was not just a ruler of the gods, he was a divine symbol of Roman strength and governance. Jupiter was deeply tied to the state, with grand temples and rituals dedicated to him. His favor was sought before battles, during elections, and in times of crisis. He was not just a king of Olympus, he was a protector of Rome. And this is where we see the greatest difference between Greek and Roman mythology. The Greek gods were deeply human, with emotions, rivalries, and unpredictable natures. The Roman gods, though borrowed from Greece, were reshaped to fit Rome's ideals, discipline, strength, and the unshakable power of an empire. So while Zeus and Jupiter may seem the same, they represent two very different worlds, one of mythology and storytelling, the other of conquest and empire.
And so we see that while Rome borrowed from Greece, it did not merely copy, it transformed. It took the myths and legends of an older civilization and reshaped them into something new, something distinctly Roman. Perhaps that is the greatest power of Rome, the ability to take what came before and forge it into something greater. This is the truth of Roman gods.
If the test of a truly great book is that everyone feels compelled to pretend that they've read it, then few books stand taller than Edward Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Alongside works like Marx's Capital and Joyce's Ulysses, Gibbon's sprawling masterpiece is regarded as essential reading, yet too long, too dense, and at times too obscure for all but the most devoted. Despite its fading readership and increasing criticism from modern historians, Gibbon's interpretation of Rome's decline remains influential, shaping not just how we view the empire's fall, but also how we understand the trajectory of modern states. One of Gibbon's most enduring insights concerns the role of religion in Rome's fall. His famous quip about Roman worship, the various modes of worship which prevailed in the Roman world were all considered by the people as equally true, by the philosopher as equally false, and by the magistrate as equally useful, has permeated popular understanding of ancient Roman religion. This passage has framed the perception of Roman piety for centuries, fostering an image of a civilization where religious belief was a mere political tool, an empty spectacle maintained to pacify the masses. The idea of senators cynically manipulating omens and priests who cared more for their political standing than divine favor is an enduring one. But is it accurate? Before deconstructing this view, we must understand how it was shaped. For centuries, both Christian and secular historians have dismissed Roman religion as inherently hollow. Christian scholars saw it as a flawed precursor to a true and universal faith, while secular observers found comfort in elite skepticism, imagining an ancient society free from the constraints of dogma. Both perspectives, despite their ideological differences, converge on the claim that Romans didn't truly believe in their gods. Rituals, they argue, were performed for tradition's sake, not out of real faith. But does this hold up to scrutiny?
Rethinking Roman belief.
The modern misunderstanding of Roman religion stems from imposing monotheistic frameworks onto an ancient polytheistic system. In the Abrahamic tradition, belief is deeply personal. Faith is measured through private devotion, prayer, and adherence to moral teachings. Roman religion, by contrast, was fundamentally communal and transactional. Its rituals were public, its prayers were often formulaic, and its deities were seen less as intimate guides and more as cosmic forces to be appeased. This structure has led many to dismiss it as insincere, but such a judgment ignores the cultural conditioning that shaped Roman spirituality. For the Romans, piety was not about personal salvation, but about maintaining harmony between the gods and the state. This transactional nature did not make their religion less authentic. Rather, it reflected a worldview where religion and civic duty were inseparable. Sacrifices and ceremonies were not empty gestures, but necessary acts to uphold the cosmic and social order. The gods were believed to favor Rome because of its adherence to these rituals, and any failure in devotion could invite disaster. Critics argue that because Roman priests were aristocrats with no formal theological training, their roles were purely political. Yet this assumes that religious sincerity and political power cannot coexist. In truth, the Roman elite had the most to lose from divine disfavor, making their participation in religious rites not just a duty, but a vested interest. Their belief in divine order was often self-serving, but that does not mean it was insincere. The idea that religious conviction must be divorced from personal advantage is a modern expectation that does not align with ancient realities.
Religion as a political instrument.
That said, Roman religion was undoubtedly political. Unlike modern societies where church and state are seen as distinct, at least in theory, the Romans had no such division. Religion was embedded in governance, with political decisions often requiring divine approval through omens and auguries. The Senate, magistrates, and even emperors frequently invoked religious justifications for policy decisions, blurring the lines between faith and power. Take, for example, the case of Bibulus, Julius Caesar's co-consul, who declared ill omens to halt votes on Caesar's legislation. While it's tempting to see this as a cynical tactic, it's also possible that Bibulus genuinely believed that disrupting the established order risked divine wrath. In a world where the gods' favor determined Rome's destiny, opposing political change through religious means was not just a strategy, it was a logical necessity. Even emperors, who wielded immense power, understood the importance of divine legitimacy, often elevating their own status through religious association. The priestly colleges, filled with Rome's elite, played a crucial role in reinforcing the status quo. Their influence over religious interpretation allowed them to shape public sentiment, ensuring that any challenge to aristocratic rule could be framed as an affront to the gods. This has led many to conclude that Roman religion was nothing more than a tool for manipulation. But again, we must resist imposing modern cynicism onto an ancient worldview. The idea that elites would use religion to uphold their power does not mean they lacked genuine belief. After all, even today, people often justify their privileges through ideological and spiritual frameworks.
The beliefs of the common people.
If the elite viewed religion as a reinforcement of social order, how did the common people perceive it? Unlike the aristocracy, plebeians had fewer political motivations to maintain religious practices, yet their devotion was profound. The gods played an active role in their daily lives, and personal piety took many forms, from household rituals to participation in state festivals. Critics often depict the Roman masses as hopelessly superstitious, easily swayed by religious spectacle. Yet this portrayal originates from elite sources who had a vested interest in depicting the lower classes as intellectually inferior. The reality was far more complex. Many plebeians likely viewed state religion with skepticism, especially when it was used to justify policies that kept them in poverty. At the same time, they found solace in local cults, mystery religions, and personal expressions of faith that existed outside the official framework. The rise of alternative religions in the late Empire, particularly Eastern cults and Christianity, suggests that many Romans were seeking a deeper, more personal religious experience. While the state cults maintained the status quo, these emerging faiths offered individual salvation and direct communion with the divine. Their popularity signals a shift in religious consciousness, one that eventually reshaped the empire itself.
The legacy of Roman religion.
As Rome transitioned from republic to empire, its religious landscape evolved. The imperial cult, which deified emperors, became the ultimate fusion of politics and piety. Worshipping the emperor was not merely an act of devotion, but a demonstration of loyalty to the state. However, this blending of faith and authority ultimately exposed the limitations of Roman religion. When honoring the emperor became a mandatory act, it revealed the system's true function as a tool of control. This overreach, ironically, paved the way for Christianity. The rigid structure of the imperial cult made alternative faiths more appealing, and Christianity, with its promise of a personal relationship with the divine, offered something Roman religion never had. Yet even as Christianity supplanted the old gods, it absorbed many of Rome's religious traditions. The title Pontifex Maximus, once held by Roman priests, is still used by the Pope today, a testament to the enduring influence of Roman spirituality. Gibbon famously claimed that Rome declined and fell, but in many ways it never truly vanished. Its traditions, beliefs, and institutions live on in unexpected ways. While the empire may be long gone, its religious legacy endures, subtly shaping the modern world in ways we rarely acknowledge. In this, at least, Rome has not yet fallen.
Imagine standing on the battlefield, the ground trembling beneath your feet as the Roman legions march forward. Row after row of warriors, their gleaming helmets crowned with towering crests of crimson and gold. But these weren't just for show. These crests held power, marking rank, commanding respect, and striking fear into the hearts of their enemies. Why did Rome's greatest warriors wear these feathered symbols of dominance? The answer lies in a story of strategy, status, and sheer psychological warfare. The purpose of the crested helmet.
The Roman crested helmets, known as galea, were more than just decorative headpieces. They served critical roles in battle, hierarchy, and psychological warfare. Primarily worn by centurions and officers, these helmets were adorned with either feathers or horsehair, making them distinct from the simpler helmets of lower-ranking soldiers. Beyond identification, the crested helmets also played a significant role in maintaining the chain of command. Within the well-structured Roman legions, rank was everything. Officers and centurions sported the most elaborate crests, while common infantrymen either had plain helmets or no crest at all. This differentiation ensured that every soldier knew who was in charge, which was essential not only in battle but also during training maneuvers and military parades. The presence of crested helmets reinforced the discipline and organization that made the Roman army one of the most formidable forces in history. Wearing a crested helmet was not just about visibility, it was also a mark of prestige and status. In Roman society, military hierarchy was deeply respected, and the size and grandeur of a soldier's helmet often reflected his experience and accomplishments. The more elaborate the crest, the higher the rank, and the greater the respect commanded on and off the battlefield. High-ranking officers who had climbed the military ranks through years of service often wore more ornate crests to symbolize their achievements. These helmets were not merely practical, they were statements of authority. During military ceremonies and parades, crested helmets took on an even greater significance. The feathers or horsehair used were often dyed in striking colors such as red, further emphasizing the wearer's importance. At triumphal processions, victorious generals and their legions displayed their decorated helmets with pride, signifying their hard-earned glory. Apart from rank, these crests also signified loyalty and dedication. Soldiers who had served long and distinguished careers were often granted the honor of wearing a more elaborate helmet. This distinction helped boost morale within the ranks, encouraging soldiers to strive for excellence and earn their place among Rome's elite warriors. In essence, the crested helmet was as much a badge of honor as it was a practical tool for identification and command.
Intimidation and legacy.
The Romans understood the power of psychological warfare. The crested helmet was designed not just to organize troops, but also to intimidate enemies. By making soldiers appear taller and more imposing, the crests contributed to the fearsome reputation of the Roman legions. When entire cohorts marched in perfect unison, their crests rising above their heads like a sea of crimson and gold, they created an awe-inspiring sight that could shake the morale of even the bravest foes. The impact of these helmets extended beyond the battlefield. In ceremonial events, the crested helmet symbolized the might of Rome and the unity of its soldiers. At victory parades, soldiers would march through the streets adorned in their grand helmets, showcasing not just their discipline, but the power of the empire itself. This visual spectacle reinforced the idea that Rome was an unbreakable force, destined to conquer and rule. Over time, the crested helmet became one of the most iconic symbols of Roman military strength. Though its practical battlefield use declined with changes in warfare, its legacy endures in historical depictions, literature, and modern reenactments. The Roman helmet, with its striking crest, remains a testament to the discipline, strategy, and grandeur of one of history's greatest armies.
In the golden city of Alexandria, a boy was born, his fate entwined with the greatest empire the world had ever seen. His name was Caesarion, son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. But power is a dangerous inheritance, and his story would end in betrayal, war, and death. This is the story of the last pharaoh.
The birth of Caesarion.
In the year 47 BCE, under the warm glow of Egyptian torches, Cleopatra VII, Queen of Egypt, held her newborn son in her arms. His birth was no ordinary event. It was the merging of two ancient worlds, Egypt, the land of pharaohs, and Rome, the rising force of the Mediterranean. His name, Ptolemy XV, Philometor Caesar, was a declaration of his lineage. To the Egyptians, he was the next divine ruler. To Cleopatra, he was the key to securing her dynasty's survival. But there was a problem. His father, Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, had not publicly acknowledged him. Caesar was a man of strategy, and while he held Cleopatra in great regard, recognizing a foreign son could be seen as a political weakness in the eyes of Rome. For Cleopatra, it didn't matter. She made sure everyone knew who he was. She paraded him as her co-ruler, dressing him in the golden robes of Egypt, placing a crown upon his head, and engraving his name beside hers on the temple walls. In her eyes, Caesarion was a god, the rightful heir to Rome and Egypt alike. But Rome did not see it that way.
The relationship between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar.
To understand Caesarion's story, we must first understand his parents. Julius Caesar and Cleopatra VII were two of the most ambitious figures in history. Their affair was not just one of passion, it was one of strategy. Cleopatra, barely 21 years old, was fighting to keep her throne. Her brother husband Ptolemy XIII, a boy king, had forced her into exile. She needed an ally, and Caesar, fresh from his victory in the Roman Civil War, was the most powerful man in the world. The story of their meeting is legendary. Cleopatra, knowing she needed to impress the Roman general, is said to have had herself smuggled into Caesar's palace in a rolled-up carpet. When the fabric unfurled before him, there she was, the Queen of Egypt, draped in silk, eyes sharp with intelligence. It worked. Caesar restored Cleopatra to the throne, and from their union, a child was born, Caesarion, the little Caesar. But Rome was not ready for a foreign queen, let alone a half-Egyptian heir to its most powerful leader.
Caesar's dilemma, acknowledging a son or protecting his rule.
In Rome, bloodline meant everything. The Republic was built on tradition, and Romans viewed monarchies with disdain. For a Roman general to father a child with a foreign queen was dangerous. If Caesar openly acknowledged Caesarion as his son, it would challenge everything the Republic stood for. Despite this, Caesar brought Cleopatra and her son to Rome in 46 BCE. The city was both captivated and horrified by the exotic queen and her child. Cleopatra lived in Caesar's villa across the Tiber River, a sign of his favor. But even then, he refused to formally declare Caesarion as his heir. Instead, he named his grandnephew, Gaius Octavius, later known as Augustus, as his successor. Why? Some historians believe it was a calculated move. Caesar knew that his enemies in the Senate were waiting for an excuse to strike. A foreign prince with Egyptian blood would be the perfect excuse to label him a tyrant, a king in all but name. And Caesar's enemies did not need more reason to act.
The Ides of March, a turning point for Caesarion.
On March 15th, 44 BCE, history changed forever. Julius Caesar, standing in the heart of the Roman Senate, was surrounded. One by one, the knives struck. First Casca, then Brutus, then the rest. Blood stained the marble floors. Rome had rid itself of a would-be king. When the news reached Egypt, Cleopatra knew her son's future was in danger. With Caesar dead, there was no Roman protection. She returned to Alexandria, retreating into the safety of her palace, and began preparing her son for the throne. But in Rome, a new power struggle was beginning. Octavian, Mark Antony, and the remnants of Caesar's allies were battling for control. And for them, Caesarion was an inconvenient problem.
The rise of Octavian, a new enemy emerges.
Among Caesar's closest allies was Octavian, his adopted grandnephew. While Mark Antony held power in the east, Octavian was consolidating Rome under his own rule. Cleopatra had once hoped to align her son with Rome, but now a new reality set in. Caesarion was a threat to Octavian's claim to power. As the years passed, Cleopatra's influence in Egypt grew stronger. She ruled alongside Caesarion, ensuring that the boy would be seen, not just as a prince, but as a living god. Statues were built in his honor, coins were minted with his image, and across Egypt, his destiny as pharaoh was secured. But Rome had not forgotten about him.
The stage is set for war.
The tension between Rome and Egypt would soon reach a boiling point. Mark Antony, Cleopatra's new ally and lover, was at odds with Octavian. In 32 BCE, the final confrontation began. The world was about to witness the greatest power struggle of its time, a battle that would decide the fate of Caesarion, Cleopatra, and the last independent kingdom of the ancient world.
The road to war, Rome's final gambit.
By 32 BCE, the fragile balance between Rome and Egypt had shattered. Octavian, now the unchallenged ruler of Rome's western provinces, declared war, not on Mark Antony alone, but on Cleopatra herself. The war was not framed as a battle between Roman generals. It was Rome versus Egypt, civilization versus the Eastern Queen, who had dared to challenge Roman supremacy. Cleopatra and Antony had raised a mighty fleet, an army built from the wealth of the East. At their side stood Caesarion, now 17 years old, learning the ways of war, standing as a symbol of his mother's ambitions. In Alexandria, the young pharaoh watched as the city prepared for the greatest battle of his time. But fate had already chosen its victor.
The Battle of Actium, 31 BCE.
On September 2nd, 31 BCE, the world held its breath. Off the coast of Actium, in the blue waters of western Greece, the two greatest powers of their time clashed. Octavian's fleet, commanded by the brilliant Admiral Agrippa, was disciplined and ruthless. Antony and Cleopatra's ships, vast and adorned in Egyptian gold, were grand, but heavy and slow. As the battle raged, it became clear Octavian was winning. Then the unthinkable happened. Cleopatra, aboard her flagship, saw the battle turning. Rather than face capture, she fled, and Antony, seeing her retreat, abandoned the fight to follow. The fleet crumbled. Rome had won. In Egypt, the news arrived like a funeral shroud. The grand army that was meant to defend Caesarion's rule had vanished in a single day. Cleopatra and Antony returned to Alexandria, knowing the end was near.
The death of Mark Antony.
Mark Antony was a soldier, a warrior who had once stood beside Julius Caesar in battle. But now, his world had collapsed. As Octavian's forces closed in on Alexandria, Cleopatra locked herself within her palace, weaving plans, seeking any way to salvage the kingdom. Antony, broken by defeat and betrayal, fell on his own sword. According to legend, as he lay dying, he was brought to Cleopatra's chambers. With his last breath, he told her to make peace with Octavian. But Cleopatra had no intention of surrender. She had one last hope: Caesarion.
A mother's final gamble.
Cleopatra knew that Octavian would never allow her son to live. He was the last blood heir of Julius Caesar, a living challenge to Rome's new ruler. Desperate, she devised a final plan: send Caesarion away. She instructed her most loyal advisors to take the young pharaoh south, down the Nile, away from Alexandria, away from Rome's reach. If he could escape to India or the Nubian kingdoms, he might yet survive. The young king, barely understanding the depth of the danger, left Alexandria, moving swiftly through the desert lands of Upper Egypt. But Octavian was already watching.
The end of the last pharaoh.
With Antony dead, Octavian marched into Alexandria, claiming the city without bloodshed. Cleopatra, realizing there was no escape, took her own life, choosing death over the humiliation of being paraded through Rome as a captive. With her gone, Octavian turned his attention to the boy. History is unclear on how Caesarion was captured. Some say he was betrayed by his own advisors. Others claim Octavian lured him back with the false promise of peace. What is certain is that by 30 BCE, the last pharaoh of Egypt was in Roman hands. Octavian, now the uncontested master of Rome, uttered the chilling words: "Too many Caesars is one too many." Shortly after, Caesarion was executed. With his death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Egypt, once the land of pharaohs and gods, became just another province of Rome.
Legacy. The forgotten son of Caesar.
The story of Caesarion is one of what could have been. He was the son of one of history's greatest generals, the last hope of an ancient kingdom, a boy raised to rule, yet never given the chance. His name was erased from history. His statues were torn down. Rome made sure that Caesarion would be forgotten. And yet centuries later, his story still lingers in the whispers of time. The tale of the last pharaoh, the son of Caesar, and the boy who was born to rule an empire, but died in its shadow.
The sun sets over Alexandria, casting golden light over the city's empty palaces. The last embers of Egypt's royal line have faded. The age of the pharaohs is over. And in the distance, the banners of Rome rise above the great library, signaling the dawn of a new world.
What if the secret to peak physical fitness was discovered thousands of years ago? The ancient Greeks weren't just warriors, philosophers, and athletes. They were pioneers of fitness, developing training methods that still influence how we exercise today. From brutal combat sports to bodyweight mastery, their approach to strength and endurance was so effective that modern workouts still echo their techniques. But this wasn't just about looking good. It was a civic duty, a way of life, and sometimes a fight for survival. So, how did they train? What lessons can we steal from their methods? Grab your sandals because today, we're stepping into the gymnasium of ancient Greece.
Few civilizations have valued physical fitness as much as the city-states of ancient Greece. To the Greeks, athleticism wasn't just a pastime, it was a way of life, deeply woven into their culture, philosophy, and even their military training. From the legendary warriors of Sparta to the celebrated Olympians of Athens, strength and endurance were seen as virtues, essential for both personal glory and the defense of the city-state. In modern times, we hit the gym, lift weights, or run marathons, but the ancient Greeks had their own rigorous training methods, many of which still hold up today. The idea of a structured workout, complete with warm-ups, main exercises, and cool-downs, can trace its origins back to their training grounds. They may not have had high-tech fitness equipment, but they knew how to get results. Their philosophy of fitness went beyond just looking good. It was about discipline, resilience, and preparing for the challenges of war. Gymnasiums were at the heart of Greek cities, where young men trained under the watchful eyes of experienced athletes and philosophers alike. Even Socrates himself had strong opinions on the matter, believing that neglecting one's body was just as shameful as neglecting one's mind. Tonight, we'll explore how the Greeks built their legendary physiques, trained for combat and competition, and laid the groundwork for many of the fitness principles we still follow today. Long before modern sports stadiums and international competitions, the Greeks held athletic contests that would shape the foundation of sports as we know them today. The most famous of these was the Olympic Games, first recorded in 776 BCE in Olympia, a sanctuary dedicated to Zeus. Unlike today's Olympics, which feature hundreds of events and athletes from across the globe, the earliest games were far simpler, starting with just a single foot race. The very first recorded champion of the Olympics was a cook named Koroibos of Elis, who won the stad race, a sprint of roughly 600 feet. His prize, not a gold medal, but an olive wreath, and perhaps more importantly, eternal fame. The Greeks placed immense value on athletic excellence, and Olympic victors were treated as heroes, showered with gifts, poetry, and even free meals for life in their hometowns. Over time, the Olympic Games expanded to include more grueling and spectacular events, such as boxing, wrestling, chariot racing, and the infamous pankration, a no-holds-barred combat sport that blurred the line between competition and survival. But these contests weren't just about personal achievement. Athletes competed to bring honor to their city-states, and the Games became a unifying force across the Greek world, drawing competitors from far and wide. Even in an era of constant warfare between city-states, a sacred truce was declared during the Olympics, allowing athletes and spectators safe passage to Olympia. For the Greeks, physical excellence wasn't just about vanity, it was a near-spiritual pursuit, a way to embody the gods themselves. After all, the most revered of their deities, Zeus and Heracles, were often depicted as paragons of strength and endurance. But beyond the glory and the spectacle, Greek athletics also laid the groundwork for structured training regimens. From strength-building exercises to endurance training, the principles established in these ancient contests would continue to shape fitness practices for millennia. Before barbells, dumbbells, or high-tech gym equipment, the Greeks sculpted their legendary physiques using the most accessible tool of all, their own bodies. Their approach to fitness was built around calisthenics, a training system that relied on bodyweight exercises to build strength, endurance, and agility. The word itself comes from the Greek kalos, meaning beautiful, and stenos, meaning strength, emphasizing both form and function. Simple yet effective movements like push-ups, squats, lunges, and pull-ups were staples in the Greek training regimen. These exercises required no equipment, just discipline and consistency. Even more advanced techniques, such as handstands, one-arm push-ups, and muscle-ups, were practiced by elite athletes and warriors to develop explosive power. For sprinters and combat athletes, resistance training played a key role. Greek runners would train on sand, a method that increased resistance, strengthening their legs and improving endurance. They also ran in full battle armor, a practice that mimicked real battlefield conditions and ensured they were ready for war. This technique later proved invaluable at the Battle of Marathon, where Greek hoplites sprinted toward the Persian army under a hail of arrows, something they had unknowingly trained for in their gymnasiums. Then there was Milo of Croton, one of the most famous strongmen of the ancient world. Legend has it that Milo developed his unparalleled strength through the principle of progressive overload, by lifting a newborn calf onto his shoulders every day. As the calf grew, so did Milo's strength, until he was eventually carrying a full-grown bull. Whether the story is true or not, the underlying concept, gradually increasing resistance over time, is still a fundamental principle of modern strength training. Greek athletes also recognized the importance of recovery. They practiced cool-down routines, walked after training to promote circulation, and even enjoyed massages and hot baths. Physicians like Hippocrates and Galen documented the benefits of proper warm-ups, cool-downs, and rehabilitation techniques, laying the foundation for modern sports medicine. In every way, the Greek training philosophy was about more than just brute strength. It was about balance, discipline, and mastering one's own body. Whether they were preparing for competition, battle, or simply to uphold the ideal of physical perfection, their methods remain relevant even thousands of years later. If the Olympics showcased the Greeks' dedication to athletic excellence, then pankration revealed their taste for sheer brutality. This ancient combat sport, a predecessor to modern mixed martial arts, MMA, was one of the most feared and respected events in Greek athletics. The name itself means all force, and that wasn't an exaggeration. Almost anything was allowed in the ring. A combination of boxing, wrestling, and raw street fighting, pankration had only two rules: no biting and no eye gouging. Everything else, fair game. Fighters could punch, kick, choke, break bones, and even slam opponents into the ground. If that wasn't intense enough, Spartan versions of the sport allegedly removed even those two restrictions, making pankration essentially a fight to the death. Unlike other Olympic sports, pankration wasn't just about competition. It was a critical part of military training. The Greeks believed that mastering unarmed combat was essential for survival on the battlefield. Soldiers were expected to fight with weapons, but if they ever lost their spear or sword, they had to rely on their own hands. Many warriors trained in pankration to develop resilience, strength, and an unshakable ability to endure pain. The historian Pausanias recorded tales of pankration fighters who refused to surrender, even when unconscious. One legendary athlete, Aricion of Phegalia, was being choked to death in a match. In his final moments, he twisted his opponent's foot with such force that he broke it, forcing the other fighter to submit. Aricion won the match, posthumously. His lifeless body was crowned with an olive wreath, securing his place in history. Another philosopher, Philostratus, described a different kind of warrior, one who could absorb endless punishment yet still stand tall. He once witnessed a pankration fighter who delivered brutal strikes but ultimately collapsed from exhaustion. His opponent, battered and bloodied but still standing, won simply by enduring the beating. This was the Greek philosophy of combat. Strength mattered, but resilience mattered even more. Pankration's influence didn't end in ancient Greece. The Romans later adopted it in their gladiatorial games, and today its legacy lives on in MMA and combat sports worldwide. The Greeks may not have had weight classes or referees stopping fights, but their brutal training methods laid the groundwork for modern martial arts disciplines. For the ancient Greeks, physical fitness wasn't just about personal glory, it was a duty to the state. In a world where city-states were constantly at war, a strong and capable population wasn't optional, it was a necessity. Every citizen was expected to maintain their body just as much as their mind, and those who neglected their physical condition were often looked down upon. No one embodied this belief more than the Spartans. From birth, Spartan boys were trained to become warriors, subjected to a grueling education system known as the agoge. Strength, endurance, and combat skills were prioritized above all else. Weak infants were abandoned, and those who survived were raised in an environment that tested their limits daily. They trained barefoot, fought each other for sport, and were even encouraged to steal food just to sharpen their survival instincts. But fitness wasn't just for warriors. Even in Athens, where intellectual pursuits were highly valued, training was seen as essential for a well-rounded citizen. Socrates himself warned against neglecting the body, saying it was a disgrace to grow old without seeing what one's body was capable of. To him, a weak body led to a weak mind. Greek gymnasiums weren't just places to exercise, they were centers of education and philosophy. Athletes trained alongside scholars, discussing politics, ethics, and strategy between workouts. The idea was simple. A fit body was a reflection of a fit mind, and the two had to be developed together. Even Greek physicians understood the value of exercise. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, believed that eating alone will not keep a man well. He must also take exercise. Galen, another famous physician, studied the effects of different workouts and wrote some of the earliest books on sports science. The warm-up, the structured workout, and even the concept of an active cool-down can all be traced back to their teachings. The Greeks saw fitness as a lifelong pursuit, not just something for young men. Even as they aged, citizens were expected to keep moving. Their philosophy of training was about longevity, discipline, and balance, principles that still shape modern fitness today. And so, thousands of years later, the legacy of Greek training lives on. Whether it's through calisthenics, combat sports, structured workouts, or even our modern Olympic Games, the foundations laid in ancient Greece continue to influence how we approach fitness. They understood that a strong body leads to a strong mind, and that lesson remains timeless.
The ancient Greeks didn't just train for sport, they trained for excellence, survival, and honor. Whether through calisthenics, brutal combat sports like pancration, or endurance challenges, their fitness philosophy was built on discipline, resilience, and balance. They understood the importance of structured workouts, recovery, and the mind-body connection, ideas that remain fundamental to modern exercise science. From the Olympic champions to the Spartan warriors, their legacy lives on in our gyms, our sports, and even our daily workouts. So whether you're lifting weights, running on sand, or just trying to stay active, remember, you're following in the footsteps of history's first true athletes.
For nearly 5 centuries, the Roman Republic stood as a beacon of power, law, and order. But by the end of the 1st century BC, its foundations were crumbling. Power was no longer in the hands of the Senate, it belonged to the generals. And one man, more than any other, threatened to reshape Rome forever. Julius Caesar had spent years conquering Gaul. His victories were legendary, his soldiers fiercely loyal. But back in Rome, his rising power was seen as a threat. The Senate feared him. They demanded he disband his army and return home, alone. The message was clear. Obey the Republic or be declared its enemy. It was a moment that would change history. To the north, Caesar received the Senate's demand. He stood at the banks of the Rubicon, the border of Italy. If he crossed it with his army, it would mean civil war. If he obeyed, his political career and possibly his life would be over. The decision was not made lightly, but history waits for no one. With a single step, the fate of Rome was sealed. On a cold morning in January 49 BC, Julius Caesar made his choice. With his army behind him, he crossed the Rubicon River, officially declaring war on the Roman Republic. It was an act of defiance, an act of ambition, an act that could not be undone. The phrase alea iacta est, the die is cast, would echo through history. Rome was now at war with itself. News of Caesar's advance spread like wildfire. Panic gripped the city. The Senate had hoped he would surrender. Instead, he was marching south, faster than anyone predicted. Towns surrendered without a fight. There was no time to prepare a defense. The Republic's only hope lay in one man, Pompey the Great. He had been Rome's most celebrated general, but now he was faced with a terrible decision. He had 2 legions, Caesar had 11. The numbers were impossible. A direct confrontation would mean certain defeat. Instead of defending Rome, Pompey made a desperate choice. He ordered a retreat. The Senate, the government, and the legions still loyal to the Republic abandoned the city. And so, for the first time in its history, the capital of the Roman Republic was left undefended. No army, no resistance, just silence. The city that once ruled the world was now at the mercy of one man. and Julius Caesar was coming. On January 17th, 49 BC, Julius Caesar entered Rome, not as a conqueror, but as a man claiming what he believed was rightfully his. There was no battle, no resistance. The Senate had fled. The greatest city in the world had been abandoned. The Republic was crumbling, but the war was far from over. While Caesar had taken Rome, his true enemy, Pompey, had escaped. He had sailed east, regrouping in Greece, where he still commanded vast legions. If Caesar wanted to rule, he would have to defeat him, but Caesar was no fool. He knew that chasing Pompey immediately could be a trap. Instead, he turned west, to Spain. Pompey's allies still held power there, and if Caesar was going to win the war, he needed to destroy every last threat. By the end of 48 BC, Spain was his, but his men were growing restless. They had fought for years, they had risked everything, and the riches Caesar had promised were still out of reach. Tension was rising within his own ranks. Mutiny was in the air. And yet, across the sea, in Greece, Pompey was waiting. He had rebuilt his army, he had secured alliances, and now he was ready. The final battle was coming. One last fight would decide the fate of Rome. The year was 48 BC. After a long campaign in Spain, Julius Caesar set his sights on the final obstacle standing between him and total control of Rome, Pompey. Pompey had not been idle. He had gathered his forces in Greece, assembling a massive army. He had cavalry, supplies, and the backing of Rome's wealthiest senators. On paper, he had every advantage, but war is not fought on paper. Caesar knew that he was outnumbered. His only hope was speed. In early 48 BC, he sailed across the Adriatic, landing in Greece with only a fraction of his army. It was a bold move, a dangerous one. If Pompey attacked now, Caesar would be crushed. For months, the two sides moved like pieces on a chessboard. Pompey had more men, but he hesitated. He wanted to wear Caesar down, to starve him out, but Caesar refused to break. And then, in the summer of 48 BC, near a small town called Pharsalus, everything came to a head. Pompey positioned himself with superior numbers, confident of victory. His cavalry outnumbered Caesar's nearly 3-1. His men were fresh, well-fed, ready to fight. Caesar's were exhausted, hungry, but they were veterans. They had fought together for years, and they trusted their leader. The battle began. Pompey's cavalry charged first, hoping to break Caesar's flank. But Caesar had anticipated this. He had hidden a small force of elite soldiers behind his lines, men trained specifically to fight cavalry. In an instant, the tide turned. Pompey's cavalry was driven back, and now Caesar had the advantage. His men pushed forward, breaking through the center of Pompey's lines. Panic spread. Within hours, Pompey's great army collapsed. His soldiers threw down their weapons and fled. Rome's greatest general, defeated, Pompey himself barely escaped. He fled, seeking refuge in Egypt, believing he would find allies there, but he was wrong. As he stepped onto Egyptian soil, he was met not with friendship, but with betrayal. Pompey the Great, once the most powerful man in Rome, was now a fugitive. After his devastating defeat at Pharsalus, he fled across the Mediterranean searching for safety. His destination, Egypt. Egypt's ruler, the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, owed Pompey a debt. Years earlier, Pompey's victories had secured Egypt's throne. Now he hoped for refuge, for an army to rebuild, for a second chance. But power is a dangerous game. Ptolemy's advisors saw an opportunity. Julius Caesar was on his way to Egypt, and he was now the most powerful man in the world. Siding with Pompey meant war. Siding with Caesar meant survival. As Pompey's boat reached the shore, he saw familiar faces, Roman officers who had once served under him. He relaxed, but then, as he stepped onto the sand, the attack was swift, brutal, no last words, no honor. Rome's greatest general was struck down by his own former allies. His head was severed, placed in a basket, an offering for Caesar. Days later, Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt. When presented with Pompey's head, he did not smile. He did not celebrate. Instead, he turned away, disgusted. This was not how a Roman should die. But Rome was changing. The Republic had already begun to fade. With Pompey dead, there was no one left to stand against Caesar. His path to absolute power was clear. He spent the next years reshaping Rome, centralizing power, and taking the title of dictator for life. The Senate still existed, but it was now little more than a formality. The Republic was no more, but power is fleeting. Even the mightiest rulers cannot escape fate. In just 4 years, Julius Caesar would meet his own bloody end, betrayed, stabbed by the very men who once called him leader. Caesar's assassination is a tragic tale, but a tale that shows just how incredible of a man he was.
It is the year 60 AD on the vast and untamed plains of Britannia, modern-day Britain. The air is thick with tension, the distant sound of war drums echoing across the rolling hills. A Roman army, hardened by years of conquest, stands firm under the command of Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus. They are but 10,000 strong, a disciplined force composed of his own Legio XIV Gemina, detachments of the Iux Valeria Victrix, and whatever auxiliaries and cavalry he could muster. Yet they are outnumbered, vastly. Across the horizon, a sea of warriors surges forward, a coalition of Britannic tribes, tens of thousands strong. At their head, riding in a grand war chariot adorned with gleaming metal and intricate carvings, is their leader, Queen Boudica of the Iceni. She is a woman scorned, a queen betrayed. The Romans have taken her kingdom, brutalized her daughters, and left her people in chains. Now she leads them in a desperate bid for vengeance. The battlefield is set. Paulinus, knowing the weight of what is to come, has chosen his ground carefully. A narrow passage flanked by thick forests, leaving his rear and sides protected. His men will hold the line, forcing the Britons into a frontal assault where discipline will triumph over raw numbers. The fate of Roman Britannia now rests on this moment. As the first war cries rise from the advancing Britons, the storm of battle is about to break.
The fire of rebellion.
The Britons advance in a chaotic wave, their warriors howling in fury, their painted bodies gleaming under the dim Britannic sun. Spears rattle, swords clash against shields, and war horns wail across the battlefield. At the front, Boudica stands tall in her chariot, her fiery red hair flowing behind her like a banner of defiance. She turns to her warriors, raising her voice above the roar of the gathered horde. Tacitus, the Roman historian, would later record her words,
"It is not as a woman of noble blood that I stand before you, but as one of the people. I fight for our lost freedom, for the scourged bodies of our kin, for the daughters of Britannia defiled by Rome. These invaders think us weak, but they will soon know the wrath of those they have wronged. We must conquer, or we must die. There is no other fate."
A deafening roar erupts from the Britons. Their resolve is unshaken, their thirst for vengeance unquenched. Boudica's warriors are not soldiers in the Roman sense. They are farmers, hunters, and blacksmiths, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, fighting not for conquest, but for survival. Yet even in their fervor, there is a flaw. Though mighty in number, they are poorly armed. Years of Roman occupation have left them stripped of proper weapons and armor. Some wield swords, but many carry hunting spears, wooden clubs, or even farming tools reforged into instruments of war. Their shields, when they have them, are simple and light, nothing compared to the ironclad discipline of the Roman legions. But in this moment, none of that matters. What they lack in steel, they make up for in sheer ferocity. With their war chariots leading the charge, they surge forward, ready to break the Roman line and cast off the yoke of empire.
The battle is about to begin. Clash of Titans.
The first wave of the Britannic assault crashes against the Roman lines like a raging tide. Boudica's war chariots, their spiked wheels gleaming with menace, surge forward in a thunderous charge. The Britons believe these chariots will scatter the Roman formations, but the legions stand firm. With practiced precision, the Roman front ranks lock their shields together, forming an unbreakable wall of iron and discipline. The whirling chariots attempt to pierce through, but the Romans counter with well-aimed pila, heavy javelins designed to pierce shields and armor alike. Some Britons fall, their chariots overturning in the chaos, horses rearing and throwing their riders. The charge falters, and the Britons withdraw, regrouping for the true assault. Then, with a great roar, Boudica gives the signal. The full force of the Britannic army surges forward. Tens of thousands of warriors, wild and frenzied, charge as one, a relentless wave of flesh and fury, weapons raised high, eyes burning with the fire of vengeance. But Paulinus does not waver. The Romans remain still, waiting. They know the moment will come. And then, within the final charging distance, Paulinus gives the order.
Loose.
The sky darkens with thousands of javelins, slicing through the air with deadly precision. The first ranks of Britons are struck down instantly. The weight of the Roman pila shatters shields, pierces flesh, and sends warriors tumbling to the ground. Chaos ripples through their lines. Still, the Britons press on. They reach the Roman front, shouting, screaming, hacking at the shields of their enemy. But the Romans, disciplined and precise, hold firm. Their short swords, gladi, lash out from behind their shields, stabbing and slashing with brutal efficiency. This is not a battle of honor, nor one of chivalry. It is a slaughter. And as the Britons continue to hurl themselves at the Roman wall, Paulinus knows his strategy is working.
The tide has begun to turn. The Roman war machine.
The battle rages on, but the tide is shifting. What began as a furious charge by the Britons has now devolved into chaos. The Roman legions, disciplined and relentless, move as one, an unbreakable wall of steel and shields. At Paulinus's command, the legions press forward in a calculated advance. They move in wedge formations like the teeth of a great iron saw, cutting deep into the mass of Britannic warriors. Each step forward drives the Britons back, their numerical advantage meaningless in the face of Roman discipline. The air is thick with the clash of iron, the screams of the wounded, and the relentless roar of battle. Blood soaks the ground. The Britons, once so confident in their overwhelming numbers, now find themselves unable to break through. Behind them, the worst possible realization begins to dawn. There is nowhere to retreat. In their eagerness for victory, they had placed their supply wagons and families at the rear of the battlefield. What was meant to be a triumphant display of conquest has become a death trap. Seeing the panic spread, Paulinus orders his cavalry to strike. Roman horsemen, their lances gleaming, charge into the Britons from the flanks. The already disorganized mass of warriors collapses further into confusion.
There is no escape, no mercy.
The Romans, sensing the enemy's desperation, fight with renewed fury. The once mighty Britannic horde is now a mass of terrified, trapped warriors, their backs against their own wagons. The battle is no longer a contest, it is a massacre. And Boudica, watching her people fall by the thousands, knows that the rebellion is lost.
The fall of a rebellion.
The battlefield is no longer a place of war, it is a graveyard. The Britons, once so sure of victory, are now trapped in a frenzy of blood and panic. Their tightly packed ranks, once a symbol of overwhelming numbers, have become their downfall. The Roman advance is unstoppable. Shields locked, swords flashing, the legions carve through the mass of warriors with mechanical precision. The disciplined formations continue to press forward, forcing the Britons against their own wagons. There is no space to maneuver, no room to flee. Those at the front are slaughtered by the Roman gladi. Those at the rear are crushed under the weight of their own fleeing comrades. The Roman cavalry ensures there is no escape. Lances pierce flesh, hooves trample the wounded, and the Britons, once fearless in their defiance, are now helpless before the might of Rome. Tacitus would later write that 80,000 Britons lay dead upon the field. By contrast, the Roman losses numbered only 400. The scale of the slaughter is unimaginable. What was meant to be a rebellion, a final strike for freedom, has ended in absolute devastation. And Boudica, queen, warrior, symbol of defiance, knows there is nothing left to fight for. Historical accounts vary on her fate. Tacitus claims she fled and, rather than face capture, took poison to end her life. Cassius Dio, another historian, suggests she fell ill and died soon after. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: her rebellion, her dream of a Britannia free from Rome, has been crushed beneath the boots of the legions. The Battle of Watling Street stands as one of the most decisive victories in Roman history. Against impossible odds, Paulinus had not only survived, but utterly destroyed the largest native force ever assembled against Rome in Britannia. His strategy, his discipline, and the unwavering might of the Roman war machine had secured victory. But though the rebellion had been crushed, its legacy would endure. Boudica became more than just a defeated queen. She became a legend, a symbol of resistance that would echo through history. And even as Rome celebrated its victory, the memory of the red-haired warrior queen who dared to defy an empire would never fade.
The legacy of Watling Street.
Centuries have passed since the bloody clash at Watling Street, yet historians and scholars still analyze and debate its significance. What can we learn from this battle? What does it tell us about the might of Rome, the resilience of the Britons, and the brutal reality of ancient warfare? For many modern historians, the Battle of Watling Street represents one of the finest examples of Roman military strategy. Gaius Suetonius. Paulinus' ability to turn overwhelming odds into a decisive victory is still studied in military academies today. His use of terrain, discipline, and tactical formations highlights why the Roman war machine dominated the ancient world for so long. Even against an enemy that outnumbered him nearly 8-1, his legions emerged victorious with minimal losses. But there is also a darker side to this victory. The brutality of the Roman response, the slaughter of not just warriors, but also women and children, paints a stark picture of the empire's approach to rebellion. Rome ruled with both civilization and cruelty, and its ability to suppress uprisings through sheer force ensured its dominance in Britannia for centuries to come. And what of Boudica? To the Romans, she was a dangerous rebel, a threat to the empire. But to modern historians, she is a symbol of defiance, an icon of resistance against oppression. Her rebellion, though ultimately doomed, shook the Roman hold on Britain and forced the empire to reconsider its policies toward native populations. In many ways, her uprising revealed the cracks in Rome's rule, foreshadowing the struggles the empire would face in later centuries. Today, Boudica stands as a national symbol in Britain. Her statue, towering near the Houses of Parliament in London, reminds us of her unbreakable spirit. The battle she lost is long past, but her legacy endures, an emblem of those who rise against impossible odds, even in the face of an empire. The Battle of Watling Street was not just a fight between Rome and the Britons. It was a defining moment in history, one that continues to teach us about power, resistance, and the cost of war.
You ever wonder what kept a Roman soldier going? I mean, really think about it. Marching for miles in the heat, armor clanking, spear in one hand, shield in the other. You don't do all that on an empty stomach. So, what did they eat? It's not exactly what you might imagine.
A lot of people think Roman soldiers were mostly vegetarian, some even say practically vegan. I've heard that rumor a dozen times.
They lived off grain.
People say.
No meat, just porridge and bread.
But that's not quite right. Actually, meat made up almost a quarter of a soldier's daily calories. A pound of pork a day wasn't uncommon. And you better believe it wasn't all roasted pig on a platter. No, they had to get clever. They salted it, dried it, turned it into bacon, boiled it in pots so worn and blackened they looked like they'd been through a war themselves, which, to be fair, they probably had. There's even evidence they hunted their own meat when rations ran dry. Wild deer, stray dogs, rats if it got bad enough. You ate what you could catch. One archaeologist once found these charred iron grills near a former Roman outpost. Looked like soldiers had been cooking meat right there over a fire, just like we might do on a camping trip. But the myth of the meatless legionnaire? That starts with a guy named Appian of Alexandria. He wrote about soldiers on campaign in Spain getting sick because they had no wine, no salt, just rabbit meat boiled in plain water, and for some reason, people ran with it. See, they didn't eat meat. But let's think about that. The soldiers weren't getting sick because of meat. They were getting sick because they only had meat. No salt, no bread, no balance. And salt? Oh, that was gold to them. In fact, ever hear the word salary? That comes from salarium, literally salt money. Roman soldiers were often paid in salt. It was that valuable. You couldn't march without it, couldn't fight, couldn't even eat properly. So yeah, they ate meat, But it wasn't just about the food, it was about the fuel, the salt, the fat, the calories that kept them on their feet. That, more than anything, kept the empire moving. So we've got meat on the fire, salt in the pack. But what was always on the Roman soldiers' menu?
One word, pause. That's porridge, basically. Not the creamy kind you get with berries and honey. This was rough, coarse, and about as exciting as wet gravel.
Grain was everything. Wheat, barley, millet, whatever they could get. They'd grind it by hand with these heavy, awkward stones. You ever try turning grain into flour in the middle of nowhere? Not exactly 5-star service, but they made it work. Boiled it in water, sometimes wine if they were lucky, maybe threw in a handful of herbs or bits of dried meat if they had any. One soldier even wrote,
Add a little bacon grease, and it almost tastes like home.
almost at least. And if they really wanted to get fancy, sausages. Yep, sausages. Roman soldiers were stuffing meat into animal intestines long before it was cool. Garlic, pepper, vinegar, maybe some pine nuts if you were stationed somewhere nice. They'd cook them over open fires or smoke them to keep for the long haul. One officer supposedly said,
If you can smell sausage in the camp, it means the march went well.
probably a joke, but probably true. Now, wine, or rather, pasca, that's the real kicker. Forget aged red wine in silver goblets. Soldiers drank a sour, vinegary wine mixed with water. Pasca, it was cheap, it was sharp, and it killed the germs in water that might otherwise make you puke your guts out. One veteran reportedly told a younger recruit, it's not about taste, it's about not dying. And bread. Oh, the bread. They made it themselves. Each contubernium, basically a squad of 8, had to bake their own flatbreads on hot stones. Tough little discs that could survive days stuffed in a satchel. Crack your teeth on one cold? Yeah, they just soak it in wine or soup to soften it up. No wonder the average Roman soldier carried almost 90 pounds of gear. Between armor, weapons, water, wine, flour, and meat, they were walking kitchens. Makes you wonder, were they soldiers first or survival chefs second? Picture this, it's dawn, the camp is breaking, tents folded, gear strapped, soldiers lining up like clockwork, and on every man's back, half a kitchen. No joke, Roman soldiers were nicknamed Muli Mariani, or Marius's mules, after the general who first said, let the men carry what they need. We move faster that way. So they did. Each man hauled a furca, a wooden pole across the shoulder with pans, pots, and bags of grain dangling like noisy wind chimes. And here's the best part, no supply truck, no cook tent. When they stopped, everyone cooked. A soldier once joked, if you're too tired to light a fire, you'll be eating cold beans in the dark. They built their fires quick, small, efficient, tucked in little dugout pits to avoid smoke. One guy handled firewood, another fetched water, another ground the grain, like a squad of mini-chefs in chainmail. And the gear, rustic but reliable. Clay pots for boiling water, bronze kettles for stew, skewers, knives, grinding stones. Some even carried tripods, 3-legged stands to hold pots over fire. You wanted soup? You had to earn it. A veteran might say, keep your gladius sharp and your kettle clean. Both save your life. And let's talk rations. Each man got a set portion, around 2 pounds of grain a day, plus salt, vinegar, and whatever meat they could scrounge or salt down. Sometimes fish, dried figs, hard cheese. If you were lucky, a nearby farm might offer eggs. If you weren't, you boiled river water and hoped no one got sick. They weren't just fighters, they were survivalists. Portable stoves, collapsible mills, even folding pans. Roman ingenuity turned every campfire into a battlefield bistro. It wasn't about gourmet, it was about getting something hot in your stomach before the next march, the next ambush, the next storm. Because a full belly meant strength, and strength kept you alive. It's sunset now, the camp is settled, Fires flicker, soldiers chew on hard bread, and somewhere in the back rows, there's movement. No, not enemy scouts, just the evening rush to the latrines. And yes, Rome had them, organized, planned, and absolutely necessary. Imagine a long trench dug just outside camp, wooden planks placed across it, evenly spaced holes. That's your bathroom for the night. No doors, no privacy, just a row of tired men grumbling. One recruit mutters, "Didn't think joining the Legion meant synchronized squatting." A veteran chuckles, "Better this than digging your own pit every night." Some camps used stone seats if they had the time or access. Others stuck to the basics, trench, plank, and a bucket of water nearby. But here's the genius part. The Romans had a system. Downhill drainage, carefully placed waste pits. Some camps even had small aqueducts to carry waste away from where people slept and ate. One centurion supposedly shouted, "The enemy won't kill you, but that fly-ridden pit will." They weren't being dramatic. Bad hygiene could ruin a legion faster than swords. To clean themselves, soldiers used a sponge on a stick, a tersorium, stored in salt water or vinegar between uses. And yes, they shared it. One soldier squints at the sponge. "You sure this one's clean?" His buddy shrugs. "Cleaner than your hands." No toilet paper, no soap, but still, better than most ancient armies. They even had urine pots set out to keep campgrounds clean. Urine, oddly enough, was collected for its ammonia, used to scrub clothes or even tan leather. Gross? Yes. Effective? Also yes. And the daily schedule? Rigid. One unit handled trench digging, another refilled vinegar barrels. Others patrolled to make sure nobody relieved themselves near the food stores. Because when you've got 5,000 men living in close quarters, discipline isn't just about marching in line, it's about where you poop. Clean camps meant fewer diseases. Fewer diseases meant more men ready to fight. And in the brutal logic of Roman warfare, even latrines became a matter of life or death. If you enjoyed this quiet journey into the grit and glory of ancient Rome, consider supporting Gods and Gladiators. Like the legions, we build piece by piece, and every like, comment, and subscription helps us march a little farther. So if you're still here, you're one of us now. Welcome to the camp.